My son said, "Mom, please don't repeat those old stories. It's embarrassing." Then my daughter added, "Mom, you don't get it. You become a burden to us." In that moment, I felt like a stranger in my own home. But life would teach them a lesson so that those who once called me useless would one day recognize my true worth. My family called me a burden, but life gave them the harshest lesson. I never thought I would live long enough to see the day when my own blood would call me useless. A burden. An embarrassment. If you're listening to me right now, I want you to pause for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine this: the people you sacrificed your entire life for, the children you carried in your womb, the ones you fed with hands that trembled with exhaustion, the ones you stayed awake for through endless nights, look at you with cold eyes and tell you that you no longer belong. That you are too much. That you are, in their way. My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 63 years old, a widow, and for most of my life, I believed with every fiber of my being that family is everything. I believed that if you gave your children love, care, and every ounce of strength you could muster, then in your old age, that love would circle back to you. I believed they would remember, they would care, they would honor. But life has a cruel way of showing you truths you never want to face. Let me take you back. This story doesn't just begin with me sitting alone in my rocking chair, staring at the silence of an empty house. It begins decades ago, when I was still a young woman, full of fire, standing at the altar with trembling hands as I said I do to the man who promised me the world. His name was Richard Hayes. For 35 years, he was my rock, my shield, my partner in every battle. We didn't have riches, but we had something far greater: love, laughter, and the stubborn determination to build a home together. We lived in a modest two-story house in Columbus, Ohio. Richard worked at a manufacturing plant, while I worked as a secretary. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. We pinched pennies, saved what we could, and filled our home with memories rather than material things. And then came the greatest blessings of my life: our 3 children, Daniel, the eldest, strong-willed and ambitious. Claire, my only daughter, sharp-tongued but with the brightest smile. And little Michael, my baby, the one I often spoiled just a little more than the others. My life revolved around them. Every decision I made, every dream I gave up, was for them. I skipped buying new clothes for myself so I could afford Daniel's football cleats. I went without proper medical checkups for years because Claire needed braces and the bills were piling up. I stayed up late into the night sewing and ironing Michael's school uniforms, making sure he looked just as polished as the wealthier kids in his class. Richard used to watch me collapse on the couch after midnight, my hands still raw from scrubbing, my eyes heavy from exhaustion, and he'd say, "Maggie, one day they'll look back and thank you." And I believed him. I believed that love and sacrifice were seeds that always bore fruit. But Richard didn't live long enough to see what happened. He was only 58 when a sudden heart attack took him from me. I still remember the way my knees buckled in the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic burning my nose, as the doctor whispered, "We did all we could." In that moment, my world collapsed. Not only had I lost the love of my life, but I had lost the only person who truly saw me, who truly stood beside me. At first, my children tried. Daniel came by with groceries. Claire called often. Michael flew home for the funeral and stayed a few weeks. For a while, I believed they would keep me close, that the bond Richard and I had built would keep the family strong. But time has a way of erasing urgency. Their visits grew fewer, the calls shorter, their lives expanded, while mine shrank. And slowly, the house grew colder, the nights lonelier, and the silence heavier. And then came the day that broke me. It was Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Daniel had invited me to his home. My heart swelled with excitement. Thanksgiving had always been Richard's favorite holiday. He would roast the turkey himself, humming to the radio while basting it, making the whole house smell of warmth and home. I had prayed that, at least, my children would carry on that tradition. I dressed in my best, an old blue dress Richard once said made my eyes sparkle. I baked pumpkin pies just the way he liked them, my hands trembling as I slid them into their tins. My heart raced with anticipation as I walked into Daniel's big suburban house, clutching those pies like treasures. But the warmth I expected wasn't there. Daniel's wife, Jessica, greeted me with the politeness one reserves for an unwelcome guest. My grandchildren barely looked up from their tablets. I hovered near the kitchen doorway, waiting for someone to notice, someone to make me feel like I belonged. The laughter around the dining table was loud, but none of it included me. When I finally tried to join the conversation, telling a story about Richard, about how he once burned the turkey because he was too busy playing with Daniel, Daniel sighed, cutting me off. Mom, please, don't start telling those old stories again. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing? My stories, my memories, my life with their father, embarrassing? Claire rolled her eyes. Honestly, Mom, sometimes you're too much. You should just relax and let us handle things. You're, well, kind of a burden. A burden. That word seared itself into my soul. My chest tightened, my throat closed, and it felt like the very air had been stolen from the room. I excused myself, slipped into the bathroom, and stared at my trembling reflection. My eyes were red, my face pale, my heart shattered. I thought, is this really me? The woman who sacrificed her youth, her body, her dreams? Am I nothing but a burden now? I left early that night, clutching the untouched pies. When I got home, I cried harder than I had even at Richard's funeral. Because Richard's death was God's will. But this cruelty from my own children, this was a choice. 4 months after, I fell into silence. I stopped calling. I stopped visiting. And you know what? They didn't notice. Not one of them knocked on my door. Not one asked if I was eating, if I was safe, if I was even alive. My fridge grew emptier, my mailbox fuller with unpaid bills. I was drowning, but invisible. The house that had once been filled with toys, laughter, and chatter now echoed with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator. Some nights, I sat in the dark, clutching Richard's photo, asking him, why did you leave me to face this alone? And then, something inside me snapped. I remembered Richard's words, one day, they'll thank you. But maybe the problem was this, I had given them too much. I had carried all the weight, and they had never learned how heavy it was. So I made a plan. I sold the house. Yes, the house where they grew up, where every wall held memories. It broke my heart, but it also set me free. With the money, I bought myself a small but cozy apartment in a senior living community. For the first time in decades, I chose a space for me. What they didn't know was that Richard had left a substantial life insurance policy. For years, I had guarded it, saving it for them. But after that Thanksgiving, I changed my mind. I rewrote my will. Not a single penny would go to the hands that called me a burden. Half would go to charities supporting single mothers, the women like me, who gave everything and received nothing. The rest, I set aside for my own care. And then, for the first time in decades, I started living. I joined a book club. I took watercolor classes. I traveled with a senior group to New Orleans, laughing like a schoolgirl as jazz bands played in the streets. I made friends. I breathed again. And then, the tables turned. 2 years later, Daniel's business collapsed under debt. Claire lost her high-paying job in a corporate downsizing. Michael went through a bitter divorce that left him with nothing. And suddenly, my phone began to ring again. Suddenly, they were showing up at my door, their faces pale with desperation. They sat in my little living room, sipping tea as if nothing had happened, and finally, Daniel spoke, Mom, we need your help. Can you lend us some money? Just until things get better. I looked at them, one by one. Daniel, angry. Claire, crying. Michael, hollow-eyed, and I remembered every word they had once said. Burden. Embarrassment. Too much. I placed my teacup gently on the table and said, with a calm I had never felt before. I'm sorry, but I can't. I don't have anything left for you. I already gave you everything I had, my youth, my strength, my years. And you called me a burden. Now, you must carry your own. The silence in that deafening. When they left, slamming the door behind them, I stood in the quiet. And for the first time I felt peace. Because life had already delivered the lesson I no longer needed to teach. They had taken me for granted, and now they were learning, the hard way, that nothing lasts forever. I whispered into the stillness, Richard, you were right. They will thank me one day. But not today. If you've been listening to my story, I want you to remember this: never let anyone make you feel like a burden. The sacrifices you made, the love you gave, it mattered. It always will. And if life ever makes you doubt your worth, remember this truth: sometimes, the greatest revenge is not anger, not bitterness, not payback. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply living well. Thank you for listening to Eleanor's story. It's a powerful reminder that labels can often blind us to the true strength and resilience within others, and sometimes, life's most challenging moments reveal the deepest truths. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever felt misunderstood or labeled by those closest to you? Or perhaps you've witnessed a similar transformation in your own family? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the human experience. Until next time, keep sharing your truth, and remember, every story has a lesson waiting to be heard.